Good evening, I'm Sheila. This is takeback.org, and whenever we have someone new in the community who has something new to bring and offer, we are on it. And tonight we have Carin Savel, who is the new Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Eastern Connecticut. Good evening, Carin.
Good evening.
It's great to have you.
And I'm very happy to be here.
Okay, and so now you live in Eastern Connecticut. What is it like making the transition from where you've been?
Well, I came from North Carolina, but I'm now living in Groton, and I have a water view, and I wake up every morning looking at the water, and I drive during the day looking at the water, and I go to sleep at night looking at the water. So I love the water.
Oh,
I love where I am.
So,
but it's definitely a cultural difference from where I've just come from.
oh, in what ways?
Well, I was the CEO of the Jewish Federation of Raleigh-Cary in Raleigh, North Carolina. And Raleigh itself is the seat of the state capital and state government, and we have the UNC system there, but we also encompassed a large area of rural North Carolina. People said, you know, 20,000 Jews living in that community, but these Jews were different than I'd grown up with. These are the Jews that greeted you saying things like, "Hi, y'all."
Y'all.
Yeah, hi, y'all.
Do they make grits and all of that?
They make grits and they make their version of kugel, and they make all the Jewish foods.
Southern
but
fried chicken?
No,
No?
I've never had Southern fried chicken.
Barbecue?
No, never ate the barbecue either.
Oh.
Well, we don't eat the barbecue in the Jewish community
Well,
anyway.
Depends
but
on the cut of meat. You could, you know.
Nah, they never did that, but they definitely cooked, and they had their own traditions, and a very strong but different Jewish community. And I'd never lived in a Southern Jewish community before.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in New York. I'm a New York girl.
Okay, like
on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'm from, you know, like any good Upper West Side girl, I started out at 64th Street, then I moved to 83rd Street, then I moved to 87th Street, and wound up living on 87th Street, West End and Riverside for the majority of my life before I left New York.
So when you live, because I grew up in the Bronx and then Little Neck in New York 2 years ago. Living in New York, you're in almost like in a cocoon. You don't maybe feel the anti-Semitism or the alienation that you feel when you move to other communities. Did you notice that too?
It's a really interesting observation. No, that was not my experience at all. I actually was born in Westbury, Long Island, and we experienced intermittent episodes of anti-Semitism and violence early on in the 60s in our home. My mother used to have, we had a great room, and that she had floor-to-ceiling stained glass windows. And every year, without fail, somebody would drive by and throw rocks with swastikas on them and break the windows.
Wow.
And every year we would say to her, just don't
And
do
this
the windows.
was in Westbury.
This was in Westbury. And growing up, I went to school in Garden City. That was restricted. And I have very clear memories of most of my life. I've worn something around my neck that tells you that I am a Jew, whether it's a Star of David or a Chai. And I have very vivid memories of being 16 years old and going to the Garden City Country Club. I was invited to a Sweet 16. And the guard saw me. He says, "I'm sorry, you cannot come in."
Really?
Oh, yes.
And you're even a
Yes.
touch younger than I am, and you experienced that.
My son experienced it when he was in school.
Really?
You know, I think that people who assume that it's over, it's not there anymore, are just wrong.
Yeah. Well, I know I got called, my little Catholic friends used to call me, "You killed Christ," and I'd go home crying to my mom and dad, and they'd explain to me what that all was about, and then they'd come to synagogue with me, and I'd go to the church with them. But so it was there. You're right. It was probably there in the background, but I never felt it as much as when I moved out to Massachusetts and was in a community where there were fewer Jews, and I felt very much different, alone, and isolated at that experience. So it's interesting. We have everybody has different experiences, but what about the anti-Semitism that we're sensing now in this country? Is it a case where it's just pretty much progressed the way it's always been, or is there a different dimension now?
I think that this is a completely different landscape for American Jews. And somewhat in Israel too, but I'm keeping it to where we are here.
Now, in what way? Because, you know, you and I grew up after the Holocaust.
Right.
And I grew up in the shadow of it in the 50s and 60s, when I always felt the world was just kind of waking up to the horror of it.
Right.
And it started to explore it in the 70s and 80s. And I think that in the 70s and 80s is when maybe the Jews started getting admitted to the all non-Jewish clubs and country clubs and
Jews with money.
It was happening. You know,
Yes.
it was starting to happen. Do you think things are really that much different now?
Oh, I think they're tremendously different. For one thing, I think that people are more emboldened now. For whatever reason, they are more emboldened to say and feel what they say and feel. Social media has changed everything about anti-Semitism. Because you're hiding behind some type of, social media persona, whether it's really you or someone else. So people will do and say the most outrageous things on social media. But I will tell you that the time that I was at the Federation in Raleigh was an eye-opening experience for me. Who would have thought coming into North Carolina that I would have the FBI on my speed dial? I mean, that's not supposed to be a part of my job description. But from the moment I was there, really until this is all federations are experiencing this, all communities. We had bomb scares, we had cross burnings. The KKK is still alive and well right outside of Raleigh. So this was right in our faces all the time. Wow. Whether it was parades or letters or we had one instance which was terrible where we got a phone call at the JCC that there were car bombs had been put into the cars. The FBI was called immediately. We go down there, they go through all the cars, they can't find anything. And there were children at the JCC. And the FBI said, we suggest that you don't park here anymore. Find another place. Well, this was our JCC, this was our parking lot, but the church across the street called and said, why don't you park in our parking lot? Nobody will know the difference. They won't be able to tell the Christian cars from the Jewish cars. Wow. And so we did that until the crisis was over. But it was one thing after another after another.
Of course, we had Pittsburgh last year, and that was a horrific thing. But maybe you can explain it. I still get the feeling that American Jews feel that America is more of their refuge and their safety net than other places in the world. We decry the anti-Semitism in Europe, and of course we watch carefully what's happening in Israel and with the anti-Zionism around the world. Why do we keep giving America such a break?
I don't think we are anymore.
You don't think we are anymore?
No, and I'll tell you something else. I think that Americans who feel that it is, safer in America than in Europe, it's about the same. I just recently returned from Berlin, and for this Jew, going to what used to be East Berlin was never on my bucket list, for sure. You could feel it in the air. And of course, the first day we were there having coffee at a cafe, somebody walked by and yelled out, Judah, Judah. It's still there.
Yeah.
But Duke University, who doesn't want to send their child to Duke University? I was called down. They had set pictures up there, like the 1945 drawings of Jews as rodents, as rats with yarmulkes on, plastered all over the Duke campus. This is now. This is now. So whether it's in Berlin or whether it's in Durham, Chapel Hill in North Carolina, it's everywhere. But people are emboldened, and Jews on the whole, we have decisions to make every time we have an instance of anti-Semitism. We can ignore it, we can fight back, or we can educate. And those are the same three decisions I look at. I never know what the right answer is until I'm in the situation.
Well, let's talk about in your new role, because
Right.
as you said, you were the executive director in Raleigh, which is a very diverse Jewish community, different than what you're maybe facing here. So how, as the director here, are you going to tackle those issues? And what do you think is the most important role that you have to play in coming to this community and helping us organize the Jewish community here?
It's a big question,
Okay.
but primarily I'm still in my listening phase. I want to know what people are looking for, what they want to do. Maybe it's because I'm a woman, I don't know, stepping into a man's shoes after 35 years. The retiring executive director, Jerry Fisher, is leaving, and he built a brilliant community, very loving. He nurtured the community, through lots of change. And here comes this woman. So the first thing that's happened is that women are coming out of the woodwork, coming to see me, calling. I've been going out to breakfast and lunch and dinner almost every day. I joked to someone a couple of days ago that I stopped buying groceries maybe 2 weeks ago. I don't have to buy food anymore. But I'm finding that the women want a bigger voice in the community. And I am very strong, I feel very strongly about collective women's impact, that it's not one particular women's group, but that we need to be collaborating and joining together to make whatever statements we want to make
Right.
as women.
So using this program as an outreach, there are probably Jews within the community of southeastern Connecticut who maybe they don't belong to a synagogue or have any Jewish affiliation. How should they join? How can they get in touch? What should they do to become part of this?
And you've hit it, of course, about on another point, is that most Jews today in a community are not affiliated with a synagogue, but they're here. And my role in the Federation, the mission of the Federation, is if you want any kind of Jewish in your life, not religion, we're not religious, we're Jewish.
Right.
Come to the Federation. So women who are listening, who are interested, I'm up for coffee all the time. Let's talk about what you want to do. There is some talk about doing a women's mission to Israel. We're talking about doing some women's impactful programs, whatever that looks like. There's been some talk about women circling back to PJ Library and bringing that back into the community.
Explain what PJ Library is.
PJ Library is just so dear to my heart. What a program. It's on its basis level, it's a program of free books for Jewish children, but you know, the history of it is wonderful. It came from Dolly Parton's Imagination Library.
Really?
And she was living in the Tennessee mountains and wanted these kids to have books, and so she did that. And Harold Grinspoon in Western Connecticut, which was the other federation I was affiliated with, he said, you know, can I take your program and make it for Jews? And she said, go ahead. So PJ stands for pajamas, and children 6 months to 8 years old get a free book every month addressed to them. Now, when you're little and you have a piece of mail addressed to you, it's a big deal. But it's a community building thing. So they get a book and they read it with their parents, but it's more than books now. They do activities, they learn how to make challah together. One of my favorite PJ stories was a mother and a daughter who got their project from PJ for the month, and it was stickers that you filled out with leaves on them, and you had your father's name, your mother, your grandmother, and you put them up on the window, decals, and at the end you had a whole family tree so the child could see it.
Yeah.
And they left to go for a walk in the neighborhood, and 2 blocks down they saw another house with the leaves in the window, and they didn't even know that they were Jews there.
So there you go.
So it is a big community builder and connector.
Can you expand it beyond age 8? Does that make sense?
So after age 8, there's a second program called PJ Our Way from 9 to 11, pre-bar mitzvah, 9 to 11, which really is not such a different program except the kids get to choose their own books. They're big on choosing their books at that point.
Right.
But we're working on a grandparents program, which I think will be gangbusters, in that the grandparents get a book, and let's say you live here in Connecticut and your grandchildren live in California, that you're reading the same book and you can FaceTime each other through PJ. It's a mobile program, but it's also a connector for the community for people who are not affiliated.
So are these things set up in New London County now?
New London had PJ Library for a long time. It has been dormant for a long time, and just as recently as this past week, we've been talking about taking steps to revive.
That's great.
Yeah.
So the Federation doesn't advocate for one type of Jewish religion over another, right?
No.
That's important for people to know.
Very important for people to understand, once again, that the Federation is not religious.
Right. And it's not really political. You
No,
don't advocate
completely apolitical
for
as well.
Things. But you advocate if there's legislation pending in the federal government or the state or locally in an ordinance in a town, and it impacts on Zionism issues or anti-Semitism issues, how...
And that's a big passion of mine, is that type of legislation.
You've had some experience in doing that kind
I
of
did.
thing in the
I
past.
worked in the General Assembly of North Carolina for about 8 years as a policy director, but I came there, I was working for the United Way, and my son's Sunday school teacher came to see me and said he wanted to run for the State House. And would I run his campaign and do his branding, raise the money, whatever. And he was running against an 8-term incumbent whose yard signs had crosses on them. And his message was, I swear to God, you can't make these things up. His message was, he's not one of us, talking about the Jewish guy who wanted to run against him. And so we worked very hard, and we had nothing to lose, so we won. But we won by 123 votes. And I think that I used to have a big poster in my office just with 123. So if you ever think that your vote doesn't count, it absolutely counts.
But I mean, I'm sure even with that, the majority of the people in the community did not vote, probably.
Probably not, but we wound up in the General Assembly with our office, and within 2 weeks they had dubbed our office the ghetto.
So we know that you were in Raleigh with the Federation, and now
Right.
you're here. And then now we see that you worked in that campaign. And where did you get your fervor for working in the Jewish community? How did that come about?
I had left Raleigh and gone up to Massachusetts, to Longmeadow, Massachusetts, Springfield, for another United Way job. I very much wanted to come back north. And I had a friend who was running the Jewish Federation of Western Massachusetts. And I say to people, I think they saw me coming up 91, because by the time I arrived, I had a crowd of people welcoming me to my new home. And I led the JCRC, which is the Jewish Community Relations Council that does all social justice for a Jewish community, whatever that turns out to be. And we had an incident in Massachusetts online on Facebook where somebody had posted a photograph in the Big Y in the supermarket. And it was a sticker on Sabra hummus that said Israel, with a line through it. It said, "Apartheid state, don't buy this hummus." So of course, you know that Sabra hummus is not made in Israel.
Right,
so
right.
that was the first mistake, and people sort of didn't really pay attention to it. But a professor at Amherst posted online, "How do I get me some of those stickers?" And about 300,000 posts later, that entire community was up in arms. And it took a committee of people. We did a town hall meeting and literally said to people, what do you want? What do you want to do here? As Jews, what do you want to do? And that's the question that I said before. Do you want to educate? Do you want to fight back? Or do you want to ignore it? And they could not agree. And I called a friend of mine in Florida, in Miami, that I'd heard the same thing happened at Publix. And I said, what did you do? And she said, we hired a lawyer who basically told us that you can't tamper with food in a public place. And so Publix took care of it for us. So we did the same thing with the Big Y. We called them. They took care of it. We didn't hear about it.
But taking that legalistic approach didn't get you to the social justice issue, the equal rights issue, the freedom of religion issue.
No.
You didn't get to the heart of the matter and where it was coming from.
Because you have to listen to what people want. I can have a heart full of fury to fight, and if the people are saying we'd rather educate or we'd rather take care of this, you have to listen to your community.
Isn't that where leadership comes in, though? It's where you now say to them, you know what, I'm the executive director of this
Well, I wasn't
group,
in Massachusetts.
and we're not going to ignore this.
Well, let's roll this
brainstorm
back.
and find a program that, well, we're not going to ignore this. We're going to face this head on. And we need the courage to do it. And yeah, it's scary.
And some people will never find the courage to do that. Consequently, because of that, I was invited on a mission to Israel through the JCPA, which is the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. And they do all of the policy for the country, for all federations and other organizations. And I went to Israel and had the good fortune to meet Shimon Peres, who gets to do that? I was at the Peres Peace Center, and we were talking about communications. How do Israelis, Palestinians, Americans, Arabs talk with each other? And we were in breakout sessions, and he came in. I mean, no one had seen him. He came in and gave a little talk to us and began to talk. You ever have sitting in the audience and someone's talking and you think that they're absolutely talking right to you?
Yeah.
That's what it felt like.
He was a great man, yeah.
And he said very clearly, you know, you are leaders in your community, and if you don't go home and work for the Jews, pretty much he said, you're not very smart, is what he said. And so I did. I went back and I told the United Way, I'm not going to renew my contract. I was the incoming CEO. I said, I'm gone and I'm going to go to work for the Jews. And I called the Federation in New York and I said, this is what I want to do. And they'd been talking to me for years about coming to do this. And we looked at a number of federations that I would start my first federation work. And I chose Raleigh because I knew the area, because I knew some of the people.
Before.
Right. So that was a good move for me. But one of the first things that I tackled, that I had failed at, by the way, in Massachusetts, was passing anti-BDS legislation.
In the legislature of North Carolina.
In the Commonwealth, yes. No, in Massachusetts we failed.
You failed in Massachusetts, but
failed in Massachusetts.
In North Carolina, you worked on it and it passed?
Within 6 months of me being
Wow.
there. And I found a lobbyist, the only Jewish lobbyist that there was, and I said, "Do you want to work on this with me?" And we pushed it ahead. But by the way, I want to tell you that the landscape of North Carolina was markedly different than when I was there the first time. There were no Jews in the legislature at all. Not a helper bee, not a legislator, not a research person. No one was Jewish. So to take a bill to protect Israel to a legislature with no Jews was a big undertaking. And we worked very hard. We, at the end, combined with all the other federations in the state to show a unified front. The bill passed. It did not pass unanimously. We had many people who didn't vote for it, but we had the votes, and the governor, to his credit, did a big public signing to sign the bill into law. So this was we were the 22nd state in North Carolina to pass anti-BDS legislation. By the way, for those listening and watching who don't know what BDS
Sure.
is, it's when people boycott and divest from the state of Israel, that it should not be there, that it's an apartheid state, it shouldn't exist. And
Well, they want to boycott Israeli products, and they want you to divest yourself of any investments in Israeli
Correct.
companies.
so this law, and by the way, if people who are interested in boycotting Israel and not using their products, they'd better get rid of their cell phones, because that's where they came from. So dump
right,
your cell
exactly.
phone. But the law actually stipulated for any of the public people, companies that were taking state funding, if you did business with people who boycotted and divested themselves from Israel, you would lose your state funding. And so that's what happened, which was brilliant because they upheld the law. It's probably my proudest accomplishment in the state of North
And
Carolina.
we don't have that kind of legislation in Connecticut, so
It's,
and
to my knowledge, they're having a lot of difficulty
there was a
passing
big
that.
controversy in Connecticut College, maybe you're aware of it, a few years ago with anti-Zionism students and involving a professor, and it was a very big controversy. So we could use some of that discussion. So how do you? The other thing is, how do you bring together all the diverse sections of the Jewish community? You've got on the one end the ultra-Orthodox, or the Chabad community.
Right.
You've got Orthodox, you've got conservative, Reform, and then you have the unaffiliated Jews.
Right.
How does the Federation make a whole from that mixture?
Because
How do you
everybody
do
has the
that?
same goal. Truthfully, everybody wants to see generational, vibrant Jewish life. Everyone looks the same. How it looks for them may be different from congregation to congregation, but the end goal is the same. And so my job and the Federation's job is to facilitate that goal, whether it's community building events or separate events. But we do things to maintain a vibrant Jewish identity.
Talk about just some of the events. I know it was a great film festival a few months ago.
The film festival was wonderful, and that's when I came, by the way. I came on day one. So by the time we talk next year, I'll be much better up on my history of what we've done in the last 30 to 40 years here.
Right.
But I know the film festival is very successful. It does bring people out. They do talk about the Holocaust, and by the way, that brings up another thing that I'm passionate about, which is making sure that we're not just attending to our Holocaust survivors in the community, but that we are very loud and clear that the Holocaust is a real thing, that it actually happened. I was working on Holocaust legislation when I left the state of North Carolina, and there's another bill floating around in the country now. There's the Anti-Semitism Act, so that they don't allow anti-Semitism, which would be brilliant. It's being passed in some places, not passed in other places.
The state of Florida, I was telling you, was looking into that, passed that.
But we here in Connecticut, we passed mandatory Holocaust education in the schools, and that's tremendous. We didn't have that in North Carolina.
Right.
We do a program in the Federation called Encountering Differences, where survivors or children of survivors go into high schools. They're not Jewish schools, they're high schools, and talk about their experience either growing up with a survivor or as a survivor.
Right.
And for these kids to read about the Holocaust is one thing. To be faced with a human being who says, this is what I went through. And for me, it's very personal. I'm firstborn generation. I'm firstborn American generation. My father was born in Cuba. My grandparents are from Russia. We had many of my family perished in the Holocaust. It's very important to me. I have large family in Tel Aviv to this day. I have a cousin in Tel Aviv who had his bar mitzvah in Dachau. And so this is very real and something that we cannot ignore because, of course, time is not on our side.
And you know, the Federation, of course, also partners with other community groups like Hadassah that I'm involved in. And we're very involved in a Holocaust Remembrance Program where we partner with the Federation and will continue to do so.
And I was there that night. It was brilliant.
Yes,
it was just
and we're
brilliant.
going to continue that, the daughters of survivors.
La
children
Dorva
of
Daughters.
Right. And we'll work together with the Federation. And we started an essay contest for high school students.
That's brilliant, too.
Which will continue in the future. So there you go, the Federation partnering with other Jewish affiliates, whether it's a sisterhood or a men's club or...
And it doesn't have to be a synagogue. We partner with all Jewish organizations.
And talk about outreach to the non-Jewish community and the kinds of things that you work with.
So that's very interesting. There is an expression in Hebrew, tikkun olam, which means repair the world. And for this community, I'm very happy to say that they take that quite literally. We repair all of the world, not just fixing the Jews and not just making sure the Jews are okay. We're in the process of running our Operation Cool Down program, and we are supplying air conditioners to needy families, senior citizens who would be sick when the summer heat comes, if they have no air conditioning. Families of 4 and 5 who are living in one room, and they come in and they pick up their air conditioner. We've had people who listen to this program who are reading what we're doing, you know, how can I help with this? The air conditioning program is a perfect example of making sure the community is done. We help people with their electric bills, with food. We do kosher lunches. We have senior lunches. Very important to ensure that the Jewish community feels connected to the world, to what is going on, that we don't have people who are out there and don't know that we exist. You know, one of the last things that I did in North Carolina before I came here was I had to oversee all of the relief work for Hurricane Florence. And people don't think about this as a federation, what we're going to do, but when the hurricane hit, and it was long and wide, and it took a long time, Jewish cemeteries, you know how we bury, the boxes were rising and floating down the streets unidentified. We had well-meaning Christians coming to the synagogues that were flooding, opening up the doors, taking out the Torahs, putting them in their trunks of their cars, and driving off as good Samaritans, but we didn't know who they were. We had senior citizens who were devastated at being shut in with the waters flooding.
Wow, yeah.
All of these things are what the Federation does. That's our responsibility.
And there's a website and a Facebook page. What's the website?
jfec.com. And I'm on there. You can reach me at any point, at any time. Our events are being listed. All of our programs are listed. We do another program, by the way, of encountering differences, where children in high schools, predominantly white high schools, get to speak to African Americans in their homes and understand how other people live, how they eat, what they do. And of course, Jerry's made a real mark, I think, in the history of doing missions to whether it's into Israel or other parts of the world, to show people how powerful Jewry is all over the world.
Okay, so we have a couple of minutes left. Any fervent wishes for the future, for the next year? What do you hope to see happen when we talk a year from now?
That's a good question. You know, I want more. I'm a child of more. I want to do more. I want to do more things, more programs. I want more women to be involved. I want to do some impactful things with women. I have a love of social justice, and I want to do more in that area. If there's a chance that Eastern Connecticut can be at the forefront of passing anti-Semitism legislation, I want us to be there. But I'm also a large collaborator, so what I'm looking forward to is collaborating with the other federations as well, collaborating with other organizations. Whether it's bus trips to New York or plane rides somewhere else, let's collaborate. Let's make some things happen.
Wonderful. And you didn't mention the Jewish Leader, which is a great newspaper.
Yes,
it
is.
People should get a subscription to. It gives you so much about the social history, the history of what's happening in this country and Israel, around the world.
Tells you everything. It comes out every other week. Call the office.
Right. So thank you, Carin. Our time is up.
That was fast.
And I hope everybody goes to the website and looks at the Facebook page and pays attention to what Carin will be doing in the next year, because she'll be doing a lot of good stuff. So we're going to see you next time on takeback.org. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Now we shake hands.
Thank you.
Yeah. See how fast it goes?
Are we off?